card reveals have now been going live for Hearthstone's Festival of Legends, and with this reveal schedule, they are starting with neutrals. So let's take a look at all of the neutrals that have been revealed so far, and then we'll take a look every day as more reveals happen. So let's jump into these. They kind of have organized these into little categories. So starting with the crew, we have the Pyro Technician. This is a 4 mana 2/5. After you cast a spell, add a random fire spell to your hand. Kind of interesting, does seem a little bit costly at 4 mana, but depending on what fire spells get revealed for this set, this could be used in some classes who are trying to get those fire spells. We really haven't seen cards like this used a lot in Standard before, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It's going to be really interesting to see what specific fire spells are revealed for this expansion and farther down the line. Next up, we have the Worgen Roadie, a 3 mana 3/4 battlecry. Summon a 0/3 instrument case for your opponent. Break it open, break it for a random weapon. Kind of interesting. We've seen a little bit of mechanic like this before, but I'm not really suspecting that this is going to be popular in Standard at all. This might be something that you can use in Arena or some other mode, but I'm not suspecting this is something that's going to see play at all in Standard. Then we have Festival Security, a 3 mana 2/5 with Taunt, and that new keyword Finale, force all enemy minions to attack this. This seems kind of neat. I like that you could just play this as a taunt minion, but it also kind of capitalizes on that Finale keyword. And if there is multiple small minions on the other side of the board, then you can play that and force those enemies to attack that, hopefully clearing them. And especially if you're able to do any sort of buffing to this and then play it, gonna be a little bit more valuable even. And 3 mana isn't terribly much of an ask. And then we have a legendary Posic Audio Engineer, a 4 mana 5/4 battlecry. Add 2 3/3 bots to your opponent's hand, and then Death Rattle, summon them for yourself. It was confirmed via Twitter as well from the lead designer for the set that if they do get, if those boombots get shuffled into the deck, and then this Death Rattle happens, they will still get summoned for you. But if your opponent plays those bots out of the hand, then you will not steal them from their side of the board if this Death Rattle goes off. So kind of interesting to know that you can, if they get shuffled into the deck or something, you would still summon them as long as your opponent hasn't played them from their hand. This one seems really interesting and kind of fun. I'm not sure how much value it's going to have, but putting a couple of cards in your opponent's hand could lead to burning a card on the opponent's side if they have a large hand size. We've seen that with things like curses. So this could be something that people want to use for that added effect. Not really sure exactly, but that's kind of the case that I'm seeing it right now. And then jumping into the next little category here, equipment. The first one, Amplified Ellic. It's a 10 mana 6/12 beast with Taunt, and then Death Rattle, deal 3 damage to all enemy minions. Kind of interesting, a little bit similar in the idea of the Taunt and dealing damage of what we've seen with the Undying Disciple, but this one more costly at that 10 mana, and that Death Rattle only dealing 3 damage instead of dealing this minion's attack. So kind of interesting. It is a beast, so it could synergize with something like Hunter that capitalizes on beasts. But honestly, for me, unless there is some sort of combo and pulling it out of the deck or doing some other advantage to kind of cheat this out or make copies of it or buff it up even more, I don't suspect that this will be used outside of those. So to me, it's kind of seeming like for Standard, a pretty fringe type of card. And then we have, honestly, probably my favorite of the neutral cards revealed so far, Frequency Oscillator. It's a 1 mana 2/1 mech with Battlecry, the next mech you play costs 1 less. I love this. It's just a solid little 1-drop, but it really feeds into mechs. And I have really loved the synergies like this. It was very similar to elementals as well. And the thing that I also love about this is that discount will carry over no matter when you play that next mech. So you could use it to, play this in more of like an aggressive, very low curve deck where you might get that value pretty immediately or the next turn. Maybe you want to play this in a deck where you only have a few very select mechs that you're going to play on turn 4, 5, 6, and you still can play this early and get that discount whenever you are going to play that next mech. So personally, I really, really like this one, and I'm excited to see what classes might be able to kind of have a mech synergy and take advantage of this discount. Next up, we have Stereotob, a 2-mana 0/3 totem. At the end of your turn, give a random minion in your hand +2/+2. So kind of interesting here. This is a totem, but it has a hand buff type of synergy. And since it's neutral, doesn't mean you have to play it in Shaman. You could play this in other decks where you just want that buff. Maybe something like the taunts that I was mentioning earlier, or some other like aggressive style deck, maybe with a mech synergy or Murlocs, anything like that. This one is very, very interesting. I'm really curious to see what classes, what the class cards are, like what we might get for those, and see what style of deck this gets played in. Honestly, I feel like the totem mechanic might not really be that important unless like Shaman actually gets some totem synergies that end up being good. But for this card, I definitely can see that hand buff synergy being used in other classes as well. So going to be kind of curious to see if this is played at all, but I think it really will also depend on what kind of synergies and cards the classes get, where maybe this just isn't still even enough. Next up, we have Metronome, a 3-mana 2/4 mech that says after you play a 1-cost card, draw a 2-cost card, then increase. This is a pretty neat mechanic, playing a card and then getting to draw the next cost up, and then that will change the card itself to then after you play a 2-cost card, you draw a 3-cost and so forth. We have kind of seen things like this before. Hunter specifically had a card like this where after a beast came down, then you would get like the next one up. This one seems really interesting, and it is a mech, so maybe you can work with that Oscillator, get it a little bit cheaper. But the thing that I actually really do like about this is it just says 1-cost card and then a 2-cost card. It's not specific to a minion or a spell or anything like that. So I think it actually will have a place because it's a little bit more flexible that way. So I do think that there is going to be a spot where this ends up fitting in, where someone will kind of take advantage of that. And honestly, we've seen a little bit of that kind of targeted draw. Again, something like Hunter with Barak Kodobane drew very specific costed cards, and that was very effective. So I do think that this is going to be one that fits somewhere and that someone will find a use for, even if it's just a one-time use. Then next we have Static Waveform, a 3-mana 5/6 elemental. Says at the start of each turn, lose 1 attack or health chosen randomly. You would play this on your turn, and then at the start of your opponent's turn, it would lose either 1 attack or 1 health, randomly between those two. And then they can do something. If they don't kill it, then your turn starts. It's going to lose another 1 attack or 1 health randomly. Pretty interesting, but this is very good stats for that 3 mana. There's also silence effects. Even if it goes back and forth a couple of times, it still seems like very, very good stats. That elemental tag on there as well. I definitely see this one being played. I think especially in like aggressive decks, 3 mana, being able to coin this out even on turn 2 and just have this huge body early very, very impactful. I definitely like this one a lot. And we have Audio Amplifier, another mech. It's a 2-mana 2/3 with a battle cry. Set your maximum mana and hand size to 11. So this is where we see that potential synergy with the Druid Beetle that was released in the latest mini set that people were talking about. How is this going to work? So here it is. But the good thing about this is that this is neutral. So all classes will have the ability to use this. Maybe that's good. Maybe it's going to end up being a little bit scary, but it's not just for druids like Guff was. This is going to be available to all classes. But the really interesting thing is that it's both mana and hand size. We did see for a very short time at one point in Standard, there was a Warlock card that set the hand size to 12 and really kind of allowed for those large hand size and to take advantage of cards that utilized that larger hand size. Now, it's kind of interesting for Warlock. There are several cards that do use that hand size right now, but they are rotating out when this expansion comes in. So for Standard, that might not be a thing, but it's going to be kind of interesting to see what cards come with this set. We still have to see all of the class cards and other expansions later on this year or even next year while this is in Standard. But both the mana and the hand size increasing for potentially any class that you play this in. Very, very interesting. And then the last little group here, vendors. The first one, Merch Seller, a 4-mana 3/5 Naga. It says, at the end of your turn, put a random spell on the top of your opponent's deck. A little bit of disruption potentially here, putting a random spell on top of your opponent's deck. That's going to be the next card that they draw. And with things like tradable cards rotating out of Standard when this comes in, also going to be kind of interesting where this really could stall a lot of decks in not drawing the cards that they want to. Could they get value off of the random spell? Potentially, yes. Will this see a lot of play in Standard? I don't really think so. I don't really suspect that this is going to be a card that's everywhere. But I do think people will want to try it and people will test with it. But this definitely feels like a very fringe tech type of card that maybe we'll see in tournament style decks, but I suspect on ladder for Standard, we're probably not going to see a lot of this. Next up, we have Outfit Tailor, a 3-mana 2/2 battle cry. Give a friendly minion attack and health equal to this minion's. Now, this one, however, I think will be a staple in some decks. Honestly, very aggressive decks, or even kind of just decks that want to put a lot of tempo on the board, that want to play minions as much as they can, or that even use hand buff synergies. This will be huge. Honestly, even just adding a 2/2 to another body could be enough to make value trades, or could be enough to give that buff to push that last bit of damage and close out a game with a more aggressive deck. So honestly, I think this one is very, very good, and I think it's going to get used a lot. And that's not even talking about if there is potential like hand buffs or things that will increase, minions in hand. And then that's even more attack and health that you're going to be able to use with this battle cry for another minion. Definitely going to keep my eye on this one. And then another legendary here, Tony, King of Piracy, a 5-mana 4/6 pirate. It says that both players' decks are swapped. And that keyword finale, draw a card. Really kind of interesting. There was one point where we did see a mechanic like this that would trade the decks. Definitely kind of felt like a fringe, meme type thing. That's how I'm seeing this one right now for Standard. But that aspect of the finale keyword, drawing a card, so it would swap your decks, and then you would draw a card that's from technically your opponent's deck that you now have that deck. You also could use that card that you just drew the following turn. Kind of an interesting mechanic here. There might be some uses for it, but I am not sure yet how like popular how common this card is going to end up being. But I do think there's going to be a spot for it. I think it's going to be fringe, but could definitely be some potential. This could also just be a card that's a ton of fun for some like custom friend games that you might play, being able to build each other goofy decks and then play this in those decks, swap each other's decks, see what happens. Could be a lot of fun. But for standard, not really sure exactly how this is going to be used yet. I don't suspect that it's going to be very popular. Well, what do you think of these neutrals so far? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure that you check out all of the videos for these reveals. And if you didn't already, check out the playlist here for all of my videos talking about the cards that are going to be leaving standard. Thank you so much for checking this out, and I'll see you in the next one.